This week, Rafiq-ur-Rahman, a teacher from Pakistan, appeared with Congressman Alan Grayson at a briefing to highlight the unintended toll of U.S. CIA drone strikes. Mr. Rahman brought his children, Nabila and Zubair, who were allegedly injured in the drone-fired missile strike aimed at terrorists that reportedly killed their grandmother. I'm PJTV's Scott Ott, joined now by Stephen Green and Bill Whittle. Well, men, in addition to the testimony of these alleged survivors, the briefing included a screening of a trailer for a new film called Unmanned: America's Drone Wars, made by the same people who brought you anti-Iraq War, anti-Koch brothers, and anti-Walmart films. Now, Bill Whittle, is Congressman Grayson giving aid and comfort to the enemy by playing on the heartstrings of sensitive Americans? And how is this different from Jane Fonda's visit with the Viet Cong in 1972?
I think of all the questions we've taken on Trifecta, that may be the most profound one, Scotty. I really do. I think that's an absolutely profound question. So I won't take too long to give you the basics, I think. We live in an open society, we live in a free society, and we not only cherish the free exchange of ideas, our entire society is predicated on it, and it's predicated on fundamental human decency. If American soldiers are committing atrocities as they did in My Lai, they don't do it very often, but occasionally they do, then I think it is incumbent upon not only the American people or other American soldiers and the American press to bring this information to light, to make sure that these people who committed this outrage are punished, and to make sure that to the best of our ability, with the weakness of the human heart, especially under the stresses of combat, that it never happens again. So if we are talking about looking into our own foibles, our own errors, our own mistakes, we as a free people ought to have the courage and the strength to be able to do that and understand it's an obligation we have not only to our soldiers but to ourselves to make sure that the good, honest, decent soldiers out there who are, you can't even call them a majority, it's essentially all of them, are not tarred by the actions of certain individuals. Now, with that said, concurrent with this, you would expect that if there was an unbiased press in the country, that the press would dedicate an amount of press space and ink in proportion to the transgression. And what we learned from the Iraq War is when the press is as biased as it is towards Republicans, something as relatively minor as Abu Ghraib is the front page news of the New York Times, 52 days in a row? And so now what happens is what should have been simply news gets politicized and it becomes a weapon. And that's where this normal, appropriate reaction to transgressions and errors on the part of our military get completely out of hand. If during an Obama administration, errors, like the case here, apparently, I don't know the details, but this is clearly an error, and errors happen in war. And in wartime, when errors happen, people get killed. If this is an error, what do? You try to make those people as whole as you can, as the case of any other error. If it's a systemic problem, it needs to be addressed in the same way that Abu Ghraib was addressed, in the same way that My Lai was addressed. So I don't say you can say that he's giving aid and comfort to the enemy in the way that Jane Fonda was, who was not talking about individual transgressions of an otherwise moral military, but simply and purely was taking the side of the enemy and issuing propaganda to make sure that they won the war effort. I don't see the two as the same at all.
Well, Stephen Green, is Congressman Grayson part of the long-awaited left-wing backlash against President Peace Prize? And if so, will the mainstream media join the chorus calling for an end to Obama's secret drone wars?
Oh, you know, I don't know what Grayson's doing. I don't expect there'll ever be a real backlash. But something does need to be said, and I want to expand on what Bill said, because he did a great job of explaining the how this happens, but not the why. So what I want to say is the progressive left, they aren't anti-war because they love people or they love life. I mean, you look at their policies and you see that they hate people. They despise life. You don't enslave people to the bureaucratic state because you love them. That's just not what you do. No, the progressive left is anti-war, and they engage in this propaganda because they are absolutely against this country and they have no interest in its security. Now, honest people in both parties can and should argue the merits of any particular war, especially before we get into one, and we should argue good in heart. But you know what? The progressive left, they will take any position which they believe, number one, will harm our national security, and number two, they can get away with politically. And as we've seen in the last dozen years, there's not a whole hell of a lot that they can't get away with politically.
Yeah, that's right.
Bill, this next question's coming to you because I can see you're poised. You're ready to say something. As you pointed out, civilians die in every war. Shouldn't Republicans defend President Obama's CIA drone strikes against these alleged terrorists? And despite the collateral damage, frankly, because these are just the consequences of al-Qaeda's decision to hide among the civilians.
Well, first thing I want to say is that unusual reaction on my face that you saw earlier, that strange look of whatever it was me just spending the last 30 seconds realizing I just offended Alan Grayson. You ask, which we will remedy in the next trifecta, by the way. Look, Scotty, here's the thing. You cannot just simply blanket the policy, right? There's no question that drone strikes against terrorist, high-level terrorist operatives is essentially the only way to act effectively against this kind of an enemy, because we're not dealing with masses of armor, we're not dealing with battleships or fleets that can be targeted and destroyed separate from the civilian population. We're not dealing with targets that are in a location like a tank column is long enough to be able to bring in manned resources that can then decide not to drop a bomb. Many times our pilots will roll in on a target and they'll just simply won't engage it because they can see that there's going to be more collateral damage than there needs to be. A drone can circle over an area for hours, 14 hours, 20 hours, something like that, and strike when the opportunity arises. So this particular technology and this particular form of warfare is absolutely essential in counterterror. Now, with that said, that does not mean that because the policy is sound and in our national interest, it does not mean that we should not be held to the strictest standards of accountability when errors take place. Because if we are not held accountable for our errors, just like everything else in this world, we'll continue to make more of them, and they'll get bigger and bigger and more egregious, and then we're going to turn into the things that we're trying to fight in the first place. And if we ever get to the point, ever get to the point in this country where an airstrike or something of that nature, which is militarily necessity, that is required and still kills innocent people, if we ever get to the point where we say, well, we don't care about those innocent people, too bad, they were in the wrong place at the wrong time, then we've lost the essence of what we are as a country. I'm ready to make the calculation that in order to protect the national interests and security of American citizens, sometimes innocent people will be killed in this kind of thing. But every time that happens, we need to take a long, cold, hard look at what we did wrong and make sure we try not to do that again. And we have an obligation to those innocent people to restore to them as much wholeness as we possibly can in the way that any other civil or criminal court here in America would allow.
Well, Steve, many people credit the nightly news film in the 1960s for turning America against the war in Vietnam. Will Congressman Grayson's attempt to put an innocent face on this aspect of the war on terror lead to a public outcry? And if so, should Republicans support or oppose a halt to CIA drone strikes?
Well, look, there's only one question you need to ask before deciding on a course of action in war, and that is, does the action you're going to take further the goal of winning the war? Now, sometimes even killing a lot of civilians does help end the war by crushing the enemy's will to resist. I'm thinking of our bombing campaigns against Germany and Japan here. But you know what? World War II is not the war we're in now. That was a total war of entire populations versus entire populations. The terror war isn't a total war. It's small scale. It's fought mostly in the shadows. And these kind of drone strikes are effective. But I'm afraid that constant drone attacks, if they're the only thing we do, they might eventually become counterproductive to the extent that to radical Islamists, they make us look weak and hesitant, like we're afraid of getting our hands dirty, and we know just how dirty that they're willing to get their hands. And to civilians, these drone strikes, they can make us appear callous and thoughtless and even cruel. Now, I love that the president is killing some very bad actors, but the question remains, are drone strikes helping us to win the war? Right now, I think they are, but if we're not careful in exactly the way that Bill just described, then they're going to become counterproductive.
Well, Congressman Grayson once again demonstrates the difference between a genuine probe into the consequences of a policy and a cheap PR stunt using people as props to tug the heartstrings toward a foregone conclusion. While I'm tempted to applaud Grayson for appearing to buck the president for once, I'd be more impressed if he also brought in victims of Islamist terrorism. We fight an enemy that uses our own values against us. When a U.S. soldier or CIA drone pilot sees his missile go amiss, he's horrified. When an al-Qaeda plan intentionally slaughters thousands of civilians and scores of Muslims to boot, as it did on 9/11, Islamists dance in the streets. As we rightfully wring our hands over moral and legal questions involving use of force, as we will lament the loss of even a single accidental victim, we face an enemy who would intentionally kill his own grandmother while shouting Allahu Akbar. For Bill Whittle, Stephen Green, and the entire Trifecta crew at PJTV.com, I'm Scott Ott.